welcome to Somewhat Scholarly. My name is Alan Hibbard, and today we're doing a reaction video. So this is my third reaction video. I'm very excited. I'm really starting to enjoy these. So today I have chosen another podcast episode from What Bitcoin Did, hosted by Peter McCormick. And the episode I've chosen came out 4 days ago on February 2nd, and this is called The Bitcoin Supercycle with Dan Held. So if you don't know Dan Held, he is the Director of Business Development at Kraken. So Kraken, Kraken.com is a crypto exchange, so you can check it out. Links will be in the description. And Dan Held is calling for $1 million Bitcoin soon. I don't know when exactly, but I'm sure he'll mention it in the podcast. So let's hear what he has to say. And of course, I will react to it and let you know if I agree or disagree and why. And here we have a little teaser from Dan. At some point in the episode, he makes this quote. He mentions KPI, that's Key Performance Indicator, by the way. He's about to say it. So he says, close to $1 million is what the KPI would be for a supercycle. And why I like it is that no one is talking about it. No one even thinks that's possible, and everyone just thinks it's going to do what it did before, and it's a very different environment. So that's Dan Held. We're going to hear him say it in just a minute, so let's get into the episode.
To kick off today, we're going to do the Bitcoin Supercycle. Now, as a lot of you know, Bitcoin has typically gone through these huge bull markets, followed by multi-year bear markets, where the price can see an 80% a drawdown. Dan thinks this time might be different. At the end of last year, he wrote a thread on Twitter and went through the different catalysts that might make this cycle a supercycle.
Guys, by the way, I did not see that tweet thread. I do follow Dan Held on Twitter, but I don't remember seeing that thread. So I haven't checked it out, but I will find it and put a link to it in the description for those of you who are interested.
Right, so let's go back. Let's start through some. Let's start with Satoshi's intent. You tell me about Satoshi's intent.
So if you're new to Bitcoin, you've probably heard a lot about this guy named Satoshi, this pseudonymous, because he has a name, which is Satoshi, he's not completely anonymous, that invented Bitcoin. But it's a super mysterious fellow who came, planted Bitcoin, helped create the community, and then mysteriously left. Satoshi was a really, really interesting guy because he had a wide variety of different understandings and perceptions of the world. This wasn't just like a computer hacker geek. I think a lot of people think of him as that, as like a hooded, kind of like how Peter looks here in his dark room with his hood. They think of him as this like hacker type. He represented, through his writings and through how he constructed Bitcoin, he had many other disciplines that he understood, like basic human incentives, like how do you incept a money from zero people that believe in it to the world believing in it. And Satoshi built Bitcoin with a 21 million hard cap. He's not perfect, right? I'm sure he's got tons of flaws, and I think he understood that too. And I think that's what even makes it even more brilliant is Satoshi knew that due to human flaws that are innate in every human, that he had to be pseudonymous. That way, none of us can pick apart his faults of being from X creed, race, religion, or whatever. He's a kind of faceless entity for Bitcoin, and that's what a decentralized money needs.
So yeah, this point about Satoshi knowing a lot about a lot of different areas is really important to consider, because a lot of people do think that Satoshi was just one thing. For example, he was just a computer programmer and that's it. And so they look at what he produced as just a computer science project. And that's understandable. However, if you start to learn about all these different fields, like, economics, finance, monetary policy, monetary history, game theory, right, incentives, human psychology, and so forth, you start to develop an appreciation for how well Satoshi knew all those fields. It's sort of like if you watch an athlete, right, like a hockey player or a football player or whatever, and you've never played those sports, right? You just watch them run around. Oh, like that guy's really good, or whatever. But if you try to play that sport and you realize how hard it is, you're like, wow, that all-star, he is really, really talented. It's almost like you have to try doing the thing to realize how hard it is, and then you start to appreciate the people who are very talented at that thing. Well, on my personal Bitcoin journey, I started exploring code. I continued exploring economics and all these other subfields like psychology and so forth. And as I started to learn more and more, I realized, holy cow, Bitcoin handles these fields so well, and Bitcoin is built in such a way to be consistent with the most fundamental principles of each of these fields. It just started to blow my mind more and more, and it continues to blow my mind. So I'm very impressed at what Satoshi has put together, whether it's one individual or a team of people, I'm not sure. But if you're skeptical on Bitcoin, I would encourage you to pick one of these rabbit holes, pick one of these fields, and go start learning about it.
And there's a couple of key things that I've learned from you that I really want to talk about as part of this before we talk about the super cycle. I want to talk about the halving cycle as a hype loop, as a marketing loop, because I think that's really important. But I think one step before there is, you've corrected me a few times. A couple of times I've come to you and said, yeah, but Dan, I get the digital gold narrative, but this is a pivot because, the white paper does say a peer-to-peer cash. I understand why some people may have gone down the big block route because of that, but you don't agree with that, do you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if folks go read the white paper, which is titled A Peer-to-Peer Electronic Cash, they immediately go down this pathway of thinking of Bitcoin like through traditional fiat money, this medium of exchange currency, which you'd go use to pay for coffee, pay for sandwiches, and buy things online. So the white paper, by the way, Satoshi said the functional details, he is quoted to have saying the functional details are not in the white paper. He wrote the white paper as a marketing message to this group of people called the cypherpunks. These guys, mainly, I actually think it was all guys, was actually a group of individuals that were the precursor. They had written about precursor like layers and components of Bitcoin, and Satoshi Frankensteined all those together to make Bitcoin, like Adam Back with proof of work, incepting like proof of work and Hashcash. And then you've got like Wei Dai, Hal Finney. Satoshi leveraged all of their learnings to go build Bitcoin. So Satoshi goes, okay, cool, I built this thing called Bitcoin, that this is the holy grail of what these cypherpunks have been looking for. And so he goes to this email newsletter group, and then he posts it in there, and he's like, hey guys, by the way, I wrote this thing called Bitcoin. So he's got to grab them with the title right away. And for them, they had been hunting for an e-cash or electronic cash. Cash, in the reference that Satoshi is using it in, which is how the cypherpunks use it, represents a final and private money. Final meaning it's after I give it to you, I can't take it back, and private meaning that it's somewhat, there's no one who could censor the transaction, and ideally we would preserve privacy.
Yeah, this is a really great point, and I mentioned this in my video, is Bitcoin actually like its white paper? So if you haven't seen that video, I encourage you to check it out. I basically went through the white paper and looked at the actual words and evaluated what's there and what's not there, because a lot of people think that certain claims are in the white paper, and I just don't think they're there. So anyways, yes, I agree with Dan's interpretation of Satoshi's intention for the use of the word cash. Basically, it's an asset that is completely settled. In other words, if you have the cash, not only is it not reversible, but also there's nothing else for you to get. There's nothing else for you to turn the cash into as a feature of the product itself. So maybe that's actually confusing, but I'll give you an example. If you have a bond, for example, which is a promise to pay cash, if I give you the bond, okay, maybe it's not reversible, maybe it's yours now, but you don't actually want the bond. Like, the bond entitles you to something else in the future, cash, right? And maybe the bond would pay you in Bitcoin, for example. That would be a Bitcoin bond. Well, in that case, Bitcoin is the cash, right? It's the final thing. So hopefully that makes sense.
All right, cool. So let's move on to the next point. Let's talk about the halving cycle. And again, it was you the first person who raised this to me, but you said that created a marketing loop. And that was actually one of the most clever parts of the design. I think most people listening, well, not everyone, I'm not guaranteed that everyone will understand that the coin issuance was 50 per block when Bitcoin launched, and then we had a halving after the first 4 years, and it's 25 and 12 and a half and so on. Not everyone listening will know that. A lot of people will, but it's probably worth talking through that. And as I believe this is your theory.
So when Satoshi built Bitcoin, and this is where it's so brilliant with how he thinks through it, he's not just a computer scientist who shits out Bitcoin and then hopes it does well. He thought through very carefully how it might be adopted, and he knew he wasn't going to be able to predict it, but he could hypothesize as to how it might come into this world. So what's really interesting about Bitcoin is that Bitcoin is a 21 million fixed issuance. Satoshi had to pick an issuance curve to issue those coins over time. So he could have had them all issued immediately, or he could have had them all issued over a very long time, or he could have had them issued over XYZ sort of time period, and he chose this one, which every 4 years the amount of newly minted Bitcoins in each block drops in half. And that moment in which it switches over is called a halving. And when we look at Bitcoin, we look at the 12, 16, and 2020 halvings, and what's really interesting is we see a corresponding bull run, which is wild. And these halving cycles, what they create is a moment of like a shock, a supply shock to the system, where now there's less supply being sold every day, which means that demand, if it stays constant, let's say you have constant supply and demand, if that supply gets cut in half and there's the same amount of demand, and the price starts to creep up. And when the price creeps up, as Satoshi hypothesized, more people will become aware of it and buy in anticipation of the price going up, which therefore increases the awareness and continues to build out the adoption cycle. And that's what we've seen with Bitcoin. And it's this virtuous loop of Satoshi tapping into the most fundamental nature of humans, which is being greedy. And he hoped that would essentially create this viral loop of more people becoming greedy and then telling other people about it, and that would bring Bitcoin into existence, and it largely has. What's really interesting too is that people come for the speculation but stay for the sound money. So not everyone who's drawn in by that human greed sticks around. That's why we see a bear market.
Yeah, I really like Dan's point here, that people in each Bitcoin cycle come for the speculation and stay for the sound money. So it's not really everybody who does that, obviously, but with each market cycle, which may or may not be related to the halving, by the way, with each market cycle, new people come in. Yeah, they see the price going up, and they're like, hey, what's this thing? Price is rising a lot. It attracts a lot of attention. And a lot of people have no idea what they're buying, but they just buy it, and they hope to make a profit off of it, measured in their local currency, like US dollars. Okay, fine. I mean, you can speculate on anything you want, but the people who actually understand what they just bought, like, wait a minute, what is this thing? In increasing numbers, people are starting to realize that Bitcoin is sound money, and that it is extremely valuable, and that it's probably worth way, way, way more to every single person on the planet than the current market price. So more and more people are realizing that. So is it related to the halvings? Probably to an extent, but of course that's not the only market dynamic here. So I don't necessarily agree with Dan, but I certainly don't disagree with him. I mean, generally I'm closer to agreeing. It's just that I haven't really thought through that specific aspect and done an analysis in order to arrive at an argument that I'm prepared to make. So, okay, it sounds close enough to being true, but I'm not prepared to defend it in any way, if that makes sense.
It's a very, very niche space. And now we've got so much more information. We've got so much better understanding of how Bitcoin works, how everything works behind it, from the social consensus to proof of work, that it's incredible to see. I think a lot of us back then just had to really believe in it and understand some of the basic values of it, but there just wasn't a lot of content.
Well, these cycles teach you a lot as well. I mean, I remember my first cycle, the price would shoot up, you think it's going to go up higher, then it will drop, and then you get fearful and you maybe sell, and then it goes back up, and like, shit, I've got to rebuy back in. And the biggest lesson you can learn, I think, is managing and being okay with volatility.
Yes. Bitcoin is a metaphor for life. There's going to be ups and downs. That's it. Life is extremely volatile. There's ups and downs in what happens to you. There's ups and downs in your emotions, like your reaction to those events. You're going to have a bunch of people who really like you throughout your life. You're going to have a bunch of people who really dislike you throughout your life. And it's like, as long as you're alive, you're alive. It's like, as long as you have wealth, you have wealth. It's like, you got to put it somewhere. So if it's in dollars, if it's in Bitcoin, whatever, but I mean, you can't just like ignore the fact that you have wealth and just like close your eyes and hope you're somehow rich. It's like you can't just close your eyes on life and just like, wait for retirement or something. Go live, like go do something, right? Build conviction in where you want to go, right? And then ride it out.
Yeah, that's a really, really nice way of putting it. A lot of people think I'm like the perfect hodler. Like my last name is Dan Held, so
Yeah,
I've been hodling for a long time. Look, no one's a perfect hodler. I day traded back in 13 poorly. I would have had a bigger stack if I hadn't. I also mined Prime Coin because I'm like, oh, maybe maybe proof of work could do something more useful. You know, everyone goes through their understanding and experimentation with the space, and so I don't fault people for ever buying shit coins and whatnot. I mean, it's just a natural part of the journey, right?
Yeah, guys, this is a really important point, which is that everyone makes mistakes in investing, right? Dan is no exception. I'm no exception. My stack of Bitcoins used to be more than twice as big. And I made a lot of, bad trades in hindsight. I tried to do too much. I tried to own too many things. I, didn't, let's just say I was learning. So I don't fault my past self. I certainly don't have any regrets. The whole point is everyone is going to make mistakes, right? Even Warren Buffett made mistakes. I mean, everybody makes mistakes. So I think the only catastrophic mistake is not getting started, just sitting on the sidelines. And I don't mean with Bitcoin or crypto. I mean with really anything in life, right? If you're just like afraid of doing something and you never try it, my goodness, then you failed, right? By choice. So like if it's about investing and building wealth, I mean, just try something and start with a small amount of money, a small amount of time, a small amount of reputation risk, a small amount of mental energy, a small amount of everything, just a small amount. So it doesn't cost you that much when the mistake ultimately arrives. And then you learn and you do better and better and better. And like, I'd rather make a mistake with $100 so that I can get it right with $10,000. You know what I mean? Like I'd rather lose $1,000 5 times over so that I can ultimately make $1 million. So anyways, go make mistakes. Only invest what you can afford to lose.
We had a $12,000 drop over the space of a few days recently, and I was a bit like, meh, okay. Whereas, 4 years ago, that, let's say, the same proportional drop, that would have worried me. And the first time around definitely would. So you learn a lot about that, but also I think you learn a lot during a bear market. I spend a lot of time in a bear market consolidating your ideas and building your conviction to the point where, I would be lying if I said, Dan, I don't look at the price in dollars, but at the same time, I'm not looking at when I'm going to sell. I know at some point I will sell bits in the future, and I'll be kind of mildly regretting it or disappointed, but you have to go through a full cycle to learn all this as well. So whilst these hype cycles are great for Bitcoin adoption, they're also great for the individual to build their own conviction.
Yes, guys, this word conviction really, really resonates with me. It is such a powerful word, and it really summarizes my investing approach. More and more increasingly, month by month by month, my conviction is growing in my investment thesis. And when I hear about all these alternatives like Ethereum taking off or GameStop or silver or anything, I'm not swayed. I mean, yes, I already own Ethereum and silver, but my point is I'm fine with my position sizes. I'm not going to double down on Ethereum because it just shot up last month or whatever. I'm not going to all of a sudden buy GameStop because it's up 20x since the beginning of the year. Same thing with silver, right? However much it increases. Like my investment thesis is basically buy and hold what I have. And if I end up with any extra dollars, like if I get any surprises, I generate some income, or I find $5 on the street, whatever it is, any extra dollars I get, those are going to buying Bitcoin. That's my investing thesis. And the more I study all these different assets or the world or the fundamentals or the technicals, the more my conviction grows in my personal thesis. And it makes sense for me with my personal risk tolerance and my investing objectives and my life experience and so forth. So it might not be the same for you, right? You might not want to own the same assets or the same percentages of each asset. But what I think does apply to you is the importance of building conviction in whatever you decide to do. Even if you keep your entire life savings in dollars, if you're going to do that, you've got to have, in my opinion, you've got to have a lot of conviction on dollars. You got to really believe that dollars are the best thing for you. And if you do, that's fine. Right? I'm not here to judge. And even if you don't, even if you're unsure, again, I'm not going to judge you. I mean, it is what it is. So my point is, if you step back and look at your wealth and you don't have huge conviction in how you're allocated, whether it's dollars, Bitcoin, stocks, whatever, if you don't have huge conviction, like this is really how I want to be positioned, then that's a sign to you that you got to explore. You got to explore. So I'm not saying all of a sudden, buy everything, sell everything, make a bunch of changes. No. I'm saying dedicate some time to building conviction, whatever it is. And by the way, the same thing happens with, every aspect of your life, right? Like your career. If you don't have conviction in your career choice, okay, it's time to do some thinking. If you don't have conviction in your relationship, time to do some thinking, and so on.
Let's just talk about this actually, just very quickly before you do that. Yeah. It is a stressful and it is a roller coaster. Basically, it is, because it's sometimes it's stressful, sometimes exciting. It is a roller coaster. I've been through some really fucking stressful time over the last 4 years. I've been wealthy, nearly bankrupt, and back to comfortable. It can be stressful because of those stupid decisions. And look, if you're new and you've got people giving you advice about Bitcoin and they've been in it for years, take that fucking advice. Listen to people.
Learn from our mistakes, learn from the stresses that we went through, and hopefully you don't make the same.
Yeah, exactly. Learn from other people's mistakes, but also you can't be afraid of making your own mistakes, right?
But, for me, being around 8 years has shown me a ton. I've seen so many narratives come and go. All these altcoins from 2014, 2017, and now. People go, oh, you're just closed-minded because you believe in Bitcoin. I'm like, I've tried a lot of different things. I didn't just start with Bitcoin. I started with Bitcoin, played around with a bunch of other stuff, then came back to Bitcoin. And that's what most journeys are for Bitcoin maximalists, is that they do that. And I actually don't even consider myself a Bitcoin maximalist. I consider myself a Bitcoin realist. It's a practical, it's based on, if you look at total addressable market, product market fit for the protocol, Bitcoin is a great investment. The other ones are much more speculative.
Yep, I would totally echo what Dan is saying here. I don't consider myself a closed-minded person, right? It's not like I'm totally into Bitcoin and I'm closed off to all the other coins. I own Ethereum, my own Litecoin, but I admit, to myself, but also to everyone, everyone in the world, those are speculative for me. Those are just speculative for me. I have great conviction in Bitcoin, but the other ones are speculative. And in the past, I've owned more than a dozen altcoins, and that's basically how I lost half my Bitcoins, was by getting rid of the Bitcoins, owning altcoins, and realizing it was a horrible decision. So, that's my personal journey, and it sounds like it's similar to Dan's, but he has been 100% in Bitcoin for the last few years. I've been, less than 100, 50% or something like that. So yeah, a lot of overlap. I also don't consider myself a Bitcoin maximalist. I don't even know what that word means. I guess it means something different to different people, but I think Bitcoin is a store of value. In other words, money, and every other crypto that I'm aware of is something else. It's not money. It's something else. And those something else's are very speculative. And they're also in inherently competitive marketplaces, whether it's smart contracts or cross-border payments or peer-to-peer cash or whatever it is. They're all very, very competitive, meaning there's not going to be a single winner in any of those marketplaces. So I personally am not interested in trying to pick which I think will be most successful or second most successful, or try to pick all the winners, or try to pick. It's just not for me.
And when I look at these cycles, though, what makes me very excited about this upcoming one, which could be, and I'll go into this in a little bit, a super cycle, is that this time is different. The 2013 bull run, the 2017 bull run, it was mainly based on retail-driven speculation. The macro markets, the rest of the world, was doing fine. It was a large bull run. And these were mainly speculative cycles run by retail with a very shaky infrastructure. Especially in 2013, you had Mt. Gox, which was a horrible infrastructure and a horrible critical component that broke down at the peak. With this bull run, we've got a lot of different things lined up. One, we have COVID, which occurred. COVID was the catalyst moment that makes Bitcoin shine. With the COVID lens, when we look at Bitcoin, for most people who had dismissed it previously, now it makes sense. And that's where we see this echoed by the institutions, the managers of all the wealth in the world, the large portion of the wealth in the world. They look at Bitcoin as a store of value, as a gold 2.0, which was my investment thesis back in 2012. That's what Bitcoin represents. It's a gold 2.0. And that is a huge value for the world. As we saw governments had their response to COVID being money printing, that will devalue these currencies eventually. And folks are looking at the 21 million fixed hard cap of Bitcoin. They're looking at this monetary policy. They're looking at Bitcoin's construction and how decentralized it is, and how you can store value in it, and no one can take that value away from you, as this incredible lifeboat. And so Bitcoin's demand, or people believing in Bitcoin, that market has grown tremendously to where now we have institutions. We also have a much more vast retail customer segment. So we've got institutional demand, retail demand, the macro backdrop of this whole world kind of aflame. And then within the crypto community, we only have really one narrative right now: gold 2.0, store of value. Bitcoin totally dominates that narrative, whereas before that narrative was dominated, like in the 2017 cycle, by Ethereum and ICOs. And so that really diminished the Bitcoin's resounding narrative of store of value. And that's where we're seeing Bitcoin's purpose for why it was built, shown in this cycle as, like, in the macro world, Bitcoin stands out as this safe store of value.
Okay, so Dan is making a lot of points here. He's basically saying that this cycle in Bitcoin is going to be unlike the previous cycles, right? Instead of being a regular cycle, it's going to be a super cycle, meaning it will go up a lot more in price and maybe not come down as much. He may elaborate on that in just a minute. And the reasons he gives are manyfold. He basically says we have more retail investors than before with a better infrastructure to buy. He says we have institutions now, whereas before we pretty much didn't, which is true. All of this is true so far. He says we have more money printing by central banks, which is true. We had some money printing before, but now it is even greater. We have coronavirus and COVID, whereas before we didn't. All right, all true. I'm trying to think if you mentioned any others. Well, basically he said that there's a mindset shift, and a lot of people realize they need a store of value, whereas before they didn't. They were just speculating. And I'm not sure. I'm not prepared to agree or disagree with him on that. I'm just not sure. I'm not sure how many people out there are looking for a store of value. I suspect it will be more and more and more. And that's sort of been my thesis all along, even before I was like aware of what Bitcoin was, right? Even when I was just researching gold and silver, trying to preserve my own wealth, many years ago before I found Bitcoin. And I thought, okay, well, for the next precious metals bull run, what happens is more and more people realize they need a store of value. And it seemed like that was going to happen over the coming decade or so, and who knows? I mean, that's now, right? That's going to be over the next, 4 or 5 years probably. So yeah, it's more, but that's not necessarily different. Like, it's a continuation of the trend, right? In order to have a bull market, you need generally speaking, a consistently growing number of people who want that asset for its utility, right? And whether it's gold or Bitcoin, which is gold 2.0, according to Dan and according to me, the needs are the same. So I don't know if his claim that we have more people who recognize the value of Bitcoin as gold 2.0, I don't know if that claim is sufficient to say, therefore this time is different. I think based on that alone, this time is still the same. Like it's still the same. Where I to me, that's what the cycle would need in order to happen. Like that's what you would need to have in order to have a bull run. And then the bear run comes from a lot of people taking profits and potentially black swans, which I'll talk about in a second. Maybe he will as well. And I did also want to comment on one other thing he said, which is that the previous bull run in Bitcoin, the 2017 bull run, was sort of overshadowed by Ethereum and ICOs. And that's definitely true. I agree with him on that. And we don't really have that going on right now. Again, true. I agree with him. So pretty much all of those individual points I agree on. I just don't agree that all of those things combined imply, therefore, this time is different. That's too much of a leap for me. Yeah, hopefully I've explained why. It's like each bull run is sort of brought about by a different thing, a different, macro environment, a different catalyst, whether it's a global pandemic or a central bank doing this or a country doing this or a world leader doing that. I mean, there's going to be different things that sort of spur each bull run, but that doesn't mean they're different necessarily, right, in terms of like magnitude or timing and that sort of thing. I mean, these cycles do tend to repeat. So far, I'm not prepared to say this time is different. I mean, the details are obviously different, but I think all of these forces that are now bigger are exactly what would be required in order to move Bitcoin to six figures, 100,000, 200,000, 300,000, or whatever, right? In order to bring in that much capital to increase the market cap by so much in nominal terms, right? An unprecedented amount in nominal terms, you would have to have these large forces. You would have to have a greater influx of retail investors. You'd have to have better infrastructure to allow them to purchase it. You would have to have institutional money coming in. You would have to have all these things. So to me, this is almost like expected. And then the next bull run, if that's like 6 years from now, right after a big bear market in between, something like that, in the next bull run, this time will be different, and we'll have all these catalysts that are like on the country level. We'll have global governments. There'll probably be global problems like global climate change, global disease, global this, global that, and it'll be in the public eye, global, and you'll have some countries who don't want to participate in it, and they might be these tiny obscure countries. I don't know, like I can't think of an example of who the first one would be, but it'll look just like the first company, right? Like MicroStrategy, who was the first publicly traded company to put Bitcoin on their balance sheet. There will be a first country to put Bitcoin in their reserves, their national reserves. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm not yet prepared to say this time is different. I'm not yet prepared to say, yeah, we're going to have a super cycle. So let's see what else Dan says.
The world didn't realize why they needed Bitcoin back then. They just speculated on it. And now they realize why they need it. I mean, governments across the world are engaging in huge money printing operations. They're doing wealth confiscation. There is no better moment for Bitcoin than this moment. And then if you look at Bitcoin's fundamentals, in the 2017 cycle, we had a civil war.
Wow, yeah. Listen, I was going to throw two more things in there. I was going to say, firstly, the amount of things that should have killed Bitcoin, the amount of things it's been through, Silk Road, Mt. Gox, like its resilience now is proven. It's just pure resilience is proven now. When somebody like Schiff talks about it going to zero, and then somebody will retort back, well, it's got more chance of going to a million than zero. They're entirely right, actually. The case for Bitcoin hitting zero is, to me, very, very tiny. Like, I try and imagine the scenarios for zero, and I just can't figure them out.
Yeah, in general, I agree with Peter and Dan here in the sense that it's far more likely that Bitcoin goes to a million than zero. But it's not impossible to go to zero. And I do have one thing that I think is possible, but very unlikely, in my mind. And I'm going to share that with you guys when this channel hits 1,000 subscribers. I'm going to make the video how Bitcoin will die.